Hello, everyone, and welcome to our January session for parent support. Today, we have the fabulous Toni Baron, one of our program specialists, presenting on a very important topic, how parents can optimize involvement in the IEP process. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Toni Baron.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk to you guys about the IEP. I'm going to go through the entire IEP and share different things that you should know while you're reviewing your child's IEP. First, the word IEP stands for Individualized Education Program. And in Maryland, we call it the Maryland Online IEP. So some people call it MOI. I tend to just call it Maryland IEP. There's lots of acronyms in special ed, but the word IEP really is just usually called IEP. I've never really heard anyone say the full title of it. So I'm going to touch on each part of the IEP and the purpose of the info on those pages. The more you know about any topic, the more you are able to make decisions and ask questions. So I hope this is useful information in general and also when you're at IEP meetings. First, I'm going to talk about the different types of IEP meetings. In MOIEP, all meetings are called IEP meetings, which is different from before we used the system. But there are different purposes that would constitute an IEP meeting. First is the initial IEP, which all of the students at Longview have already had. It is held after the completion of a full evaluation and when it's been determined that a student is eligible to receive special education services. What we have most of is the annual review. An annual review must be held at least annually to review the IEP and ensure that all information continues to be relevant and to make revisions as appropriate. There's also what's called the reevaluation planning and reeval determinations meetings that are required at minimum every 3 years. At a planning meeting, the team determines if additional data is needed to determine such things as whether the child continues to be eligible for special education services, to plan for the student, to determine if the student's needs have changed, or if they require additional modifications or services to their IEP. Formal testing is only required if the team determines that additional data is needed. If that was to happen, there's a separate authorization form that you would sign, giving the team permission to complete the assessments. If there are no areas identified to assess, then the team can reconfirm the student's eligibility and change the date on that page. If there's testing and a redetermination meeting has to occur, that would be held within 90 days after that planning meeting. The last type of meeting that takes place are called amendment meetings. And amendment meetings take place in between annuals to make changes, There's also amendment meetings without a meeting. The parent would always be made aware that there was a change being made to the IEP, but it would be for things that are such as like just clerical errors. Other reasons to have an amendment meeting would be to update a present level, or if a goal needed to be changed, anything that's not requiring an entire IEP. Okay, the first main part of the IEP is called the eligibility page. And on the eligibility page, there's a part we would check that says continued eligibility. And then the reason for this page is it tells why a student is eligible for special education services. There's also a date on the page, which is the most recent date that the child was reconfirmed for eligibility in special education. If the team determines that assessments are needed, this is one of the pages that would identify the areas being assessed. The next part of the IEP is what's called the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Some people will call this PLAFST. I just call it present levels. The present level is where you will learn what your child is working on. Each present level indicates the data on the goals. The data could possibly come from the curriculum also. The present level also includes what instruction looks like for your child. You should have a better understanding of what your child is able to do and how. You should also know, after reading the present level, the supports that they need. For example, wait time, choices, pictures of real objects. If after reading a present level or hearing about it, you don't know what your child is doing, please just ask. Just ask what it looks like. The next area is called the area discussion, which is kind of an odd name, but that includes your parent input. Sometimes parents send us emails or we gather that information at the meeting. There's also an impact statement in this area that is an overall description of your child's primary disability and what they need to access curriculum. At Longview, in this impact statement, we also include why they require a separate special education school. Okay, the next part is called the special considerations, supplementary aids and services, and testing accommodations. These pages include everything your child needs to access instruction. The importance of these pages is that you know the specific supports and modifications that your child needs to be successful in school. Examples of accommodations and supplementary aids are adapted equipment, such as their wheelchairs and standers, augmentative communication to include things like picture supports. Also, alternative ways to demonstrate learning. This would allow the reader to know how your child demonstrates their learning through things such as eye gaze or pointing. Other examples include how the instruction should be presented, where their preferred field of vision is, possibly the number of choices that they need to choose from, possibly light to direct their attention, and things such as adapted writing utensils. These pages you might think are kind of obvious that this is what a child needs, but this document should be able to be read by any educator and parent and tell them what the student needs to be successful. Okay, the next part of the IEP is the goal pages. The goal pages are made up of multiple sections. First of all, it would have the area such as reading, writing, math, speech, or physical therapy, occupational therapy. There's also the conditions, which is the given statement, the time frame, methods of measurement, criteria, and objectives. So on the goal page, this is what they should be working the next steps in the present levels. The goals are also based on the curriculum. Needs need to be prioritized. IEPs are not intended to cover the curriculum. It is specifically where the IEP team finds these are the most important areas the students should be working on the next year. This does not mean that they won't be working on other areas. It just means that these will be the main focus. So the beginning of every goal, there's a given statement, and that is what your child needs. They're all the supports that we just talked about. It is not necessarily an exhaustive list, but it's the specifics that are needed for that goal. The time frame for a goal is pretty much always within a year. There are special circumstances when a student might only be working on something for a shorter period of time. But pretty much it's always 1 year from the IEP meeting date. Methods of measurement are going to include things such as data sheets, teacher observations, checklists, work samples. They could be video samples. The criteria is usually either in percentages or something like 4 out of 5 times. Then the most important part of the IEP the most important part of the goal is the objectives. The objectives will tell you exactly what your child will be working on and what they should be able to do. Okay. Based on what works best for individual students is how services are determined. It is determined by the service provider what they feel a student needs on a weekly or monthly basis to make progress and eventually master the goal. An example would be, say, speech would be for 2 sessions, 30 minutes weekly. So that's the number of sessions, the length of time, and then the frequency. At the end of the IEP is what you hear us refer to as the LRE page. It is the least restrictive environment. The decision for a student's LRE is discussed yearly, but I will be honest, if the school team was thinking differently, we would definitely have a conversation with you prior to any kind of meeting. And if you're ever thinking that another placement is more appropriate for your child, just let your teacher know, or Ms. Starr or myself, and we can talk you through the process. The LRE page also includes information on what the student needs to ride the special education bus. There's things like that they need an attendant on the bus. It also, for the majority of our students, would say that it has to be a wheelchair accessible bus. And there are other such things if they have other medical conditions that would require air-conditioned bus. Those sorts of things are located on that page that's called the LRE page. So another part of the IEP that is a separate document is called the Alternative Instruction and Assessment Eligibility Tools. There are 2 tools or 2 forms that every student has to have filled out yearly. The first one is the Alternative Appendix A, Participation and Criteria Checklist. This form determines if a student is eligible based on their individual cognitive and adaptive scores, along with the educational assessment and any other data that would help guide the decision. The second form is the Alternative Appendix C, which is called the Parental Consent Form. This is what gives you consent. So the Appendix A finds the student eligible, and then Appendix C is where the parent would give consent. This form is reviewed yearly, and now I'm going to talk to you about the 4 areas in the state of Maryland, the 4 criteria that students have to meet in order to be eligible to be on the alternative assessment and access alternative curriculum. The first one is that the student has to have an IEP, and all students at Longview have an IEP. The second criteria is the student has to have a cognitive disability, a significant cognitive disability that impacts all parts of their functioning. The student also needs to be working on a curriculum that is significantly modified in order for that student to access the curriculum, and that the student requires extensive repetition of materials to make progress. Each of these has a source of evidence. that goes along with it, such as impact statements, cognitive and adaptive scores, present levels, progress on their IEPs. This is the main part of the alternative assessment form. So as you know, you receive quarterly at the same time as students receive their report cards, you receive what's called IEP quarterly progress note. And there are different progress codes that your child may receive. The purpose of this is to provide you with information of how your child is progressing on their goals. So it could be marked achieved, or it could be marked making sufficient progress to meet the goal. And there would be data included in the description of the progress of how the student is doing. If not making sufficient progress is marked, the IE team will then meet to address and make changes to the IEP so that the student would be able to make progress towards the goal. If it is a recently introduced goal or not introduced because an IEP meeting just has happened, those areas would be marked. So the reason for the meeting was how you can optimize your involvement in the IEP process. There's multiple things that you could do. Completing the parent report or submitting a statement, reviewing the draft documents beforehand, and asking questions. Teachers really do like to answer questions, so please ask at any time. There's only so much time in an IEP meeting, and since the students at Longview have such complex needs and large IEP teams, there are many areas to review. At the meetings, the major focus is going to be on the present levels and the goals. If there is ever any other information that you need, please just let us know. I'm also always willing to meet with parents to review specific concerns and or just to talk you through the IEP process. One of the questions that you could possibly ask at IEP meetings is for ideas of what you can do at home. At school, we are always working on functional skills there, so they are also applicable at home. I hope that learning more about the parts of the IEP will assist you in better understanding the documents and the IEP process. And this is when I would leave time for questions and answers.
Well, thank you, Toni, and everybody knows that they can reach out to Toni Baron. You're welcome to call the school or email her directly. Toni, thank you so much, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.